500 men under his command, 6 outlaw chapters, 40 support clubs.
I mean, I had 2 positions. I was the president of my own chapter, and I was vice president of the region and head of the COC, which had 40 support clubs. So totally between the 40 support clubs, the 6 outlaw chapters, and there's probably 500 guys.
Behind these numbers stood one man who transformed Chicago's motorcycle club scene, not with violence, but with strategy. A political science graduate who could deploy more tactical brilliance in a parking lot than most generals see in a war room.
Here's a guy who's at a well-known university in Wisconsin studying political science. He has an internship with the state legislature, and yet, on the other hand, he's leading the life of an outlaw.
14 years, 11 months, and 7 days of absolute power.
I was waiting to retire to get my full 15 years in.
Yeah.
That 14 years, 11 months, and 1 week.
Until cancer struck. 3 weeks in intensive care. 7 months confined to bed. Yet he never lost control. His network spanned every corner of Chicago, from the grittiest bars to the gleaming towers of McCormick Place, where his army of 600 could materialize within hours. In 1991, he bought his first Harley, and by 2015, he commanded the largest confederation of motorcycle clubs Chicago had ever seen.
Pete was, correct me if I'm wrong, regional president? Was that the highest rank you held in the Outlaws?
It was regional vice president, but I was the one in charge of the Chicagoland area. But I had, there was a regional president I had above me, and then, of course, the national boss, too.
When rivals brought guns to the table, he brought chess moves. While others marked territory in blood, he marked it with strategy. This isn't just another tale of chrome and leather. This is the story of the last Chicago boss, a man who ruled the streets with his mind when others failed with their fists. The numbers don't lie, but they don't tell the whole story either. Pete James wasn't born into the outlaw life. He chose it. Growing up in Chicago during the 1970s, Pete had already shown the seeds of leadership that would later define his path.
If you look at Pete's life, it's obvious that he had leadership skills.
His journey began in an unlikely place, a well-known university in Wisconsin, where he studied political science and held an internship with the state legislature.
For my family, I was going to be the first one to go to college because I was going to I played football in college. So I leave high school, I go to college to play football, but once I get to college, it opens up a whole new world to me.
Who would have thought that a simple college student would become one of Chicago's most influential motorcycle club leaders?
Do you really want to continue to be a political scientist and then go on to law school? Or do you want to try to follow that vision from when you were in like the 7th grade? And I kind of went along. While I was in college, I fooled around with a lot of different money-making deals, selling weed, stuff like that, and organizing and making pretty good money.
But the turning point came in 1987. Pete had been traveling around the country, making his final stop in a town outside Boston called Methuen, before returning to Chicago. Like many young men of his era, he was searching for something more than the conventional path laid out before him.
Well, I got back to Chicago in 1987, right? I'd been traveling around the country, just going, and my last stop was a town outside of Boston called Methuen. And I decided to come back to Chicago, and my cousin had told me he could get me a straight job, right? Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, I'll do it. I came back, And I worked at the straight job for a little bit.
It wasn't the movies or TV shows that drew Pete to the outlaw lifestyle. It was the raw authenticity of it all. By 1991, he had purchased his first brand new Harley-Davidson, equipped with the Evolution engine. That bike would become his ticket into a world few truly understood.
So then all of a sudden, Harley comes out with this new motor that's called the Evolution, and it's like pretty reliable, and you don't have all the bullshit you had with the other bikes. So I buy one. I buy my first brand new motorcycle in 1991.
Even then, the transformation from college graduate to outlaw wasn't instant. Pete worked legitimate jobs, ran various hustles, and learned the streets. He was building something most people couldn't see, a foundation in strategy and leadership that would serve him well in the years to come. Those early years taught Pete valuable lessons about survival and strategy. He never forgot the wisdom handed down by his mentors. If you can't afford bail and a lawyer on your first pinch, you're not very good at what you do. Words that would echo throughout his career. Through it all, Pete maintained his intellectual curiosity. He studied the art of war by Sun Tzu, The Godfather, and other strategic texts that would later influence his leadership style.
It was partly by design and partly by fate, right? So when I was young, and this is about the 7th grade, I had like a dream that I wanted to be a boss in Chicago. I didn't know what I wanted to be a boss of, but I just wanted to be someone in charge. And then I read the book, The Godfather, and there was so much in it that made so much sense to me. And I thought, wow, if the whole world ran like this, it would probably be a better place. Now, that I read probably in high school, right?
How many outlaw bikers do you know who can quote both ancient Chinese philosophy and street wisdom in the same conversation? The stage was set.
So now I'm hanging around in this biker bar, and now here comes some outlaws. Well, the next thing I know, hey, come on down to the clubhouse. And the first time he asked me to come down to the clubhouse, I didn't even go. I was like, well, I'm not sure this is the route for me, you know. The second time, he kind of shamed me into it. He was kind of goes to me, goes, what, are you afraid to come down there?
Uh-oh.
And I was like, no, I'm not afraid to go anywhere.
Right.
He goes, then why don't you come down? I says, okay. I go, when's a good time to come down? So he goes, Friday night. So I went down there Friday night.
The pieces were in place, but nobody, not even Pete himself, could have predicted just how far this path would take him.
But that's pretty much where it all started, and everybody there was pretty good, pretty decent guys, and had fun. And I was like, yeah, this isn't too bad. And then from there, I ended up meeting the shot caller, and he took a liking to me.
Hey brothers, tired of YouTube's BS and censorship? It's time to break free. That's why I've shifted gears to Patreon, where I can bring you the raw, uncensored content you crave. Join my Patreon crew and get an insane package deal. Exclusive early access to all videos, days before YouTube, 100% ad-free viewing experience. Uncensored, no-holds-barred community discussions, double the content, 2 killer videos every single week. VIP access, direct interaction with yours truly, inside scoop, exclusive biker world updates you won't find anywhere else. Ready to join the elite? Hit that Patreon link now. Your support doesn't just keep us rolling, it fuels a revolution of uncensored, unrestricted content. Join now and unlock a world of exclusive benefits. Leadership isn't given, it's earned. In the biker world of the early 1990s, Chicago was a different animal. Pete's rise through the ranks wasn't just about being tough, though with his size, that came naturally. It was about understanding people, politics, and power.
The shot caller, so he kind of liked me, you know, and And he was a tough guy. He was a hard guy to be around. But my whole life, I based everything on, I don't care how hard a guy you are. If I can learn something from you, then I will put up with that. And he was not an easy guy.
His chapter became known for its disciplined approach and strategic thinking. The numbers tell their own story. 6 outlaw chapters under his command, 40 support clubs in his coalition, and approximately 500 members looking to him for leadership. Ever wonder how one man manages to keep that many strong personalities aligned? It takes more than just muscle. It takes brains. Pete's leadership style was unique for its time. While others relied on brute force, he implemented systems.
There's 4 books that I use as like a Bible, that I used as a Bible for everything that, and there's one I still refer to this day, but that molded my thinking. And one of them was Sun Tzu's Art of War. Mm-hmm. Now, the title, when you hear Art of War, oh, okay, how do you win a war? Well, yeah, but that's not what the title is about. It should be how to avoid the art of avoiding a war.
Right.
See, and that was the philosophy that I took with me when I ended up taking over after seeing how hard and how valiantly those other guys fought.
Take his meeting protocols. 6 different greasy spoon locations, each known only to specific chapters.
Now, for the meeting places, I had 6 different chapters underneath me, right? And then I had a bunch of support clubs, but 6 actual 1%er outlaw chapters underneath me. So I went in every one of those areas and found greasy spoons where guys like us would walk in and we wouldn't turn heads. Mm-hmm. Okay? So that would be the location of where we would meet. And I wrote that down on a piece of paper and only gave it to nobody knew any of the other locations.
2-hour advance arrival times.
But then I would say on the phone, listen, I'll meet you at 3 o'clock, which meant I will meet you 2 hours before whatever the number was.
Weather Channel audio coverage for security. These weren't just paranoid precautions. They were survival tactics in a world where the stakes were highest. Organization was key. Under him, every support club had its role, and every chapter its territory. When the massive motorcycle swap meets at McCormick Place came around, Pete could mobilize 600 bikers, a show of force that kept the peace without firing a shot. That's power. But with power comes responsibility. Pete understood something many leaders forget. You can't set people up to fail. He evaluated each member's strengths and weaknesses, assigning tasks accordingly.
You have to be smart enough to understand when to be the tortoise and when to be the hare.
Right.
That's a key. People think that being a criminal, oh, that's a great life. It's a hard fucking life if you do it right.
And through it all, he maintained his strategic approach. He studied his opposition, understood the changing landscape, and adapted accordingly. In a world where many leaders fell to ego or impulse, Pete's calculated approach kept his people alive and free. But times were changing, fast. The old ways of controlling territory through physical presence were becoming obsolete in the face of new technology. Pete watched as the internet transformed the landscape of power, bringing both opportunities and challenges. Who would have predicted that clubs from Australia would be starting chapters in Chicago through email contacts? The rules of engagement were shifting beneath everyone's feet. Traditional concepts of turf and territory meant less in a world where anyone could order anything online. Remember when controlling a city block actually meant something? Pete did, but he didn't hold on to the past. Instead, he adapted his strategies accordingly, focusing more on building alliances rather than just maintaining borders. His confederation of clubs became a model of modern organization.
Okay, let's just grab territory. Wherever anybody goes, there's going to be outlaw supporters, right? So that's where that COC came into effect, with that confederation of clubs.
With 40 support clubs under the umbrella, each with their own motorcycle associations, Pete created a network that covered all of Chicago.
Where there was like 40 support clubs. So they were all over the city. And then those 40 support clubs had motorcycle associations underneath them.
When he organized events at swap meets, he could put 400 to 500 people on the ground, not for violence, but for presence. But as the biker landscape evolved, so did law enforcement strategies. Gone were the days of simple surveillance teams and vans. Now they had technology that could separate voices from background music, facial recognition software, and digital tracking capabilities. Pete's response? A magnetic whiteboard for sensitive communications and a network of secure meeting spots that would make a spy novelist proud. But perhaps the biggest change was in the people themselves. The old breed of bikers was aging out, and the new generation had different values. Through it all, Pete maintained his strategic approach. When others wanted to fight against change, he adapted to it.
But I used the magnetic board for anything, like how I would set things up was, like, if you watch a baseball game, I love baseball, right? So if you look at the third base coach, he's over there giving signs, right?
Yeah.
But it's called an indicator. So no matter what he's doing means nothing until he gives the indicator sign.
Right.
And then after the indicator comes what you're supposed to do.
When everyone else was looking at the ground in front of them, he was scanning the horizon. That's what real leadership looks like, not just handling today's problems, but anticipating tomorrow's. The game was evolving, and Pete understood something crucial. You either adapt or you go extinct. Brotherhood isn't born from patches, it's forged in fire. Pete knew that leading a motorcycle club wasn't about being the toughest guy in the room, though very few would challenge him physically. It was about building and maintaining relationships that could weather any storm. The kind of bonds that can only be formed through shared experiences and mutual respect. Consider the Friday night traditions at the House of Fortune in Chinatown. These weren't just meals. They were ceremonies of brotherhood. Grease Lightning, a notoriously difficult old-timer, would hold court every Friday night. The unwritten rules were clear. Nobody took leftovers home except Grease. Ever try telling a 1%er he can't take home his own takeout? Pete learned these subtle power dynamics and used them to build stronger bonds. But the challenges of leadership were constant. How do you maintain discipline without breaking spirits? How do you enforce rules while fostering brotherhood? Pete's approach was unique. He used what he called his equation system. Every member had their strengths and weaknesses, and good leadership meant putting people in positions to succeed. Take the massive rides he organized, packs of 200 bikes rolling through Chicago's streets. Pete understood the complexity of managing such events. The baggers had to ride in the back because you couldn't see around them. The blockers needed to be skilled and fearless. Every detail mattered because lives were at stake. Brotherhood meant being there in the tough times too. When it rained, they got wet together. When danger threatened, they faced it as one. Pete's leadership style fostered this unity, not through fear or force, but through respect and understanding. And the true test of brotherhood came at church meetings. 8 o'clock meant 8 o'clock, not 8:15, not 8:30. Respect for the brotherhood meant being there early, sharing drinks and stories before the meeting started.
It took me like 6 months to become the boss of the north side of Chicago, right? So, but they come shuffling in whenever they wanted to. Church was at 8 o'clock. Guys were showing up at 8:30.
Those who didn't understand this simple principle didn't last long under Pete's leadership. Real brotherhood, Pete knew, wasn't about wearing the same patches. It was about sharing the same values.
And that's why I tell you, I used to tell people all the time, if you don't enjoy this life, then you're picking the worst thing you possibly could do. Go play golf. Go learn how to bowl or play tennis or do some shit like that. But if you don't like being on your motorcycle and being a one percenter, you don't get weekends off.
In a world where loyalty is often just a word, he built something real. March 2013 brought a new kind of war. This wasn't a territory dispute or club rivalry. It was cancer, and it hit Pete harder than any opponent ever had.
I found out I had cancer like in March of 2013.
The diagnosis came like a sucker punch. Kidney cancer requiring immediate surgery.
September of 2013, I had my kidney removed. And then that led to other complications.
You think facing down rival clubs is tough? Try hearing a doctor tell you that they need to cut you open. For Pete, the numbers painted their own grim picture. 3 weeks in intensive care, followed by another 10 days in the hospital.
So I was in intensive care for like 3 weeks, almost 3 weeks, and then I was in the hospital for about another 10 days.
And the complications didn't end there. Post-surgery, Pete found himself confined to bed for 7 months, connected to a wound vac.
Then they sent me home, and because I had to do more surgeries, they hooked me up to this thing called a wound vac.
Okay.
And it's a pretty incredible thing, so you didn't have to change the dressing.
How would he run a motorcycle club from a hospital bed? It's not exactly covered in the leadership manuals. But Pete approached this battle like he approached everything else, with strategy and determination. When Loyola Medical Center pushed for immediate surgery and aggressive treatment in 2015, after finding a mass between his heart and lung, Pete did something that surprised everyone.
In the spring of 2015, I actually went back in for another CAT scan, and then they said, well, we want to give you a blood test. And I'm like, well, an x-ray, because I was getting blood tests. So they want to give me an x-ray.
Okay.
So when I do a CAT scan and the x-ray, they say now they found a mass on a lymph node in between my heart and my lung.
He got a second opinion, and the University of Chicago offered just that. Instead of rushing into surgery, they suggested monitoring the situation.
So I'm in here with this doctor, and he tells me, he says, look, he goes, first of all, we don't know if you need surgery. We don't know if you need chemo. We're not doing any of that. He goes, and looking at your records and what you've gone through, we're not going to do surgeries on you. We're not going to put you through that unless we absolutely have to. So he goes, why don't you, let's set up a CAT scan and some blood work, and let's see what happens.
Their approach proved right. The mass didn't grow. Sometimes the best strategy is patience, something Pete had learned long ago in his club leadership days. Through it all, he maintained his responsibilities. But there were internal issues within the club.
So now there's an issue there, and it doesn't go well, and I don't really want to go into that because...
Yeah, but the issue was because you were sick.
Well, it wasn't so much because I was sick. There was some internal issues.
6 outlaw chapters, 40 support clubs, and hundreds of members still needed leadership.
I wasn't there to do... I had 2 positions. I was the president of my own chapter, and I was vice president of the region, and head of the COC, which had 40 support clubs. So totally between the 40 support clubs, the 6 outlaw chapters, and there's probably 500 guys.
He'd attend meetings when he could, even having one clubhouse modify their setup so he could drive his car right in.
I went on a medical leave. Okay, so that two other two different people divided up my spots, basically.
By September 2015, Pete faced another reality. After 14 years, 11 months, and 1 week in the club, just 3 weeks shy of his planned 15-year retirement mark, changes were coming. The cancer had changed the game, but it hadn't changed the man. Throughout this period, Pete never lost his strategic mindset. He approached cancer like he approached club leadership: gather intelligence, evaluate options, make decisions, and never show weakness. That's what real biker warriors do. Every story has an ending. And after nearly 15 years in the club, Pete's journey was coming to a close. Not with a bang or battlefield glory, but with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen enough winters to know when spring was over. But his legacy lived on in the lesson he taught. The strategic thinking that kept people alive. The organizational skills that built one of Chicago's strongest coalitions. The leadership principles that turned tough guys into sophisticated operators. How many leaders get to write their own final chapter? He later resigned from COC.
In February of that year, when I resigned as the chairman of the COC, okay, and then everyone on the board of the COC, they resigned also because they had been with me basically for the whole 15 years.
But he was remembered long after, not for what he did, but what he taught others to do. In 2017, Pete's story reached a wider audience with the release of The Last Chicago Boss, co-written with Carrie Drobin.
That book came out in September of 2017.
But true to his nature, Pete remained modest about his achievements. "I did more illegal stuff before joining the club than while in it," he'd say with a knowing smile. It was never about the illegal activities. It was about the brotherhood, the leadership, the strategy. 8.5 years after his cancer diagnosis, Pete stands as a testament to resilience. He survived the streets, survived cancer, and survived the changing times. The lessons remain: adapt or die. Lead with your head, not just your fists, and always, always have a backup plan. These days, Pete watches the motorcycle club world from a distance. 6 years on, he sees the changes accelerating.
But I've been out of the club for 6 years.
Yeah.
What they do and what they're up to is their business.
Yeah.
I don't pay attention. Sometimes I hear things that, are going on, and I think to myself, how would you handle this if you were still there? And then I say to myself, aren't you glad you're on?
Think the old school ways are gone for good? Maybe. But the principles Pete taught, leadership, strategy, brotherhood, those are timeless. The Last Chicago Boss may have hung up his cuts, but his influence rides on. Because in a world of temporary tough guys and weekend warriors, Pete James showed what real leadership is.